And welcome back. It's tomorrow. It's also next week if you're seeing this now, when it comes out. So, being that it's tomorrow, if you saw last week's video, I mentioned that this background had to dry, and it has done so wonderfully. This, of course, I got impatient with, so we're going to fix that. And we're going to finish off this grass, and probably do one more layer on the background of this, and then start on those hibiscus. I mean, seriously start on the hibiscus, not just the stamens and stuff. Maybe add some details to the leaves. We'll see. But let's get started. It is continuing in its heat wave, but not terribly bad right now. So, where do we want to stick this leaf? Coming off the page, going under the other leaves. Maybe going under the other leaves? Yeah, probably. Because it would come down, and then it would go under. This grouping looks like it's coming from a flower over here somewhere, so let's see if we can. Maybe the flower's up there. Let's put the flower up there, and the leaf would come down here. This one's here, so probably going to come down some more. Let's stick one right in the middle between these two leaf groups. We've got these leaf groups. I'm probably just going to put that there and have one come off the side. Alrighty then, pick a brush. Pick a brush. Let's use that good old Princton number 6 I've been using. Get it wet, because it works better to pick it up if it's already wet a little bit. Interesting thing about water is attracted to itself. If you want to experiment with that, you can take 2 glasses of water, or more accurately, one that's full of water and one that doesn't have any water, and a string. Get the string wet. Stick the string in one side of that glass, with the water in it, obviously, and then put the other end of the string in the other glass. Eventually, you will have water in both glasses. Neat, huh? Good old science. Some people have also, I've noticed, started using this particular practice to water plants while they're gone for the week. Look at those. They'll get a bucket of water and they put it above the plants. And they'll take string, wet string, and they'll run it from the buckets and bury it slightly in each of the pots they want to keep watered. I haven't tried this, but supposedly you can water your plants while you're gone on vacation. Whatever vacation is. But you can set this up if you're going to be gone for a few days, and you can not have dead plants when you come home, hopefully. Nice, huh? Like I said, I haven't tried this. It may not work, but that is the recommendation built on the scientific principle. So in theory, that wonderful word theory, it should work. A lot of theories out there. A lot of theories that people try to make into facts, but a theory is just an idea somebody had that hasn't quite been proven yet. And there are a lot of things out there that are merely theories that nobody has proven yet. And yet they walk around like they're real. If you know what I'm talking about, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't know, you probably want to be ignorant anyway, and I will leave you that way. Why? Because I think knowledge should be earned. If you want to know something, I like spouting off scientific facts, and hopefully people don't mind that on the channel. Because believe it or not, while I'm painting, I'm often thinking about the scientific principles behind some of the things I'm painting. Yeah, I know, there's probably other things I could be thinking about, but it's a lot better than some of the things I could be thinking about. I could be thinking about horrible injustices or things I can't control. I can't control science either, but at least it's not something that's out to get me or whatever conspiracist theory people worry about. Speaking of those, I'll have to put a link down to his channel if I mentioned this, but I've been watching another artist. His name is Pete, and he's a abstract artist. And he's been doing a series lately on art conspiracies, specifically as related to abstract art. Some of them are pretty far out there. He's even literally gotten out a tinfoil hat to put it on. It's pretty funny, so I will try very hard to mention Pete. If you enjoy listening to me ramble on, you're going to love listening to him. He is hilarious. And he has some very interesting ideas about art and life in general. Because like I said, he is an abstract artist, so his approach to art is a little different than mine. He's not trying to make it look like anything. He's just enjoying the process of making art. Shocker to nobody. It's, you know, it can be quite enjoyable. It doesn't have to be great. I know one of the other things I enjoy is a group called Art Professor, and it's a group of art professors, obviously, and they put up weekly challenges and talk about art and some of the directions it's going and encourage other artists. One of the things they did recently was a call to put up your bad art. Just, you know, show the world that artists aren't perfect, that we are perfectly capable of making terrible art. Honestly, I refuse to quit most of my art until it's at least acceptable, so I did have to do some digging. Finally, what I shared with them was one of the excerpts from my 2022 Inktober set. And I really just wasn't feeling it last year. I did the Inktober, I did the whole 30 days of Inktober. But I really just wasn't feeling it. So most of it was absolutely awful. I'll go ahead and put those veins in since I'm going to be using the same color anyway. Get a Princton #1 liner brush. But anyway, I took the call. I was probably like second or third person to put something up there. And I chose a piece that was inspired by the word foul. Just going to put some lines on here for our veins. But the piece in question was called Foul. And basically, I just took the word and played with it. I created a duck character who's sitting there with a Tommy machine gun, badly drawn, all of it badly drawn because I did it with a ink pen, I think it was a brush pen actually, one of the Faber-Castell brush pens. And I drew him sitting in a torn up couch, smoking a cigar, drinking a beer. And the couch is torn up, like I said. He's got a machine gun sitting next to him by this couch. He's smoking the cigar, and he does. He looks really nasty, on top of being badly drawn. A fun little character, but definitely not good art. It was badly drawn, and she loved it. They just loved it. It's like, yes, this is what I'm talking about. It's hilarious, but it's still bad art. It's like, yep, it is. It's awful. At least by my standards. That's not throwing stones at anybody. We all have our own standards. Anytime you go to a public place and just look at the way people dress, you can see that people have their own standards. A lot of times those standards are not my standards anymore. Because I look in the mirror and I say, if I don't want to see that walking down the street, why would I look that way? That's literally how I choose it. Do I want to see that walking down the street? No. And I'm not going to look that way when I leave the house. personally don't think that my heavy legs are any fun to look at, so I make sure that I cover them at least at the knees. There's a certain amount of flesh hanging out that is not attractive on heavier people or well-endowed people, depending on how you want to look at it. I don't want to see it walking down the street, so I'm not going to look that way walking down the street. I think things would be a lot nicer if people would do that, because no matter what your body shape, there is usually going to be an outfit that, if not exactly flattering, at least doesn't look like you didn't care. Like you just grabbed something out of the dumpster and threw it on. Standards. Why have they changed? 50 years ago, yeah, well, maybe closer to 60 years ago, if you walked down the street in a pair of pants with holes and rips in them, people would be embarrassed for you because you couldn't afford decent clothing. And now they sell it that way. 50, 60 years ago, if you walked around with a lot of flesh hanging out, then you were a hussy. How much were you by the hour? Now it's hard to find anything that doesn't leave most of you hanging out, or wondering if everyone's going to see your underwear when you bend over. A lot of standards have changed. I'm not going to say they've changed for the better. But those are my opinions. Everyone's got their own opinions. Everyone is going to do what they're going to do. Not everybody's going to like what I'm doing here. Maybe some people prefer abstract art. Sorry. I tried doing it once. It just wasn't mine. It wasn't for me. I wanted to get too fussy with it. I wanted more control. I wanted it to look like something, instead of just looking like I lost control with the paint on the page. And if you like that, that's fine. I'm sure in fact, I know I've mentioned my lack of understanding for the concept of abstract art before. I'm sure there are people that love it. There are places where I don't mind seeing it. I don't mind seeing it in professional places. You know, places where you're not supposed to linger a long time. There we go. I'll let that dry before we try getting into reds, because red and green make brown. And that's not what we really want here. So let's move on to something where we do want to see green and brown. First, I think I'm going to fix that up there. So I'm going to get that number 6 back again. And before I turned on the camera, I went ahead and sprayed everything down a little bit so that it'll be easier to just go ahead and get my paint. And I'm a little worried that might be a little too wet, so wipe some of that off. There we go. And redefine the stem just a little bit, because it's kind of, I was impatient when I did it, so it kind of feathered out into non-compositional. There we go. Now let's go get number 3 there. Get a little paint for that, because this is behind that stem, but also behind this older leaf. So I can paint over the over leaf. This is called layering. So let's layer right over the top of that. You see how adding that paint right over that dry paint just made that other one just a little darker? This is one of those things that watercolor is kind of famous for, being able to do that. A lot of watercolor artists that I follow really enjoy layering like this, because it gives them the chance to really showcase light. I know I talk about light a lot on this channel, but that's kind of what watercolor is all about. about showcasing light and the way it filters through things. Because watercolor is just really, really good at highlighting when light is filtering through one thing into another. A little bit. There we go. There. A little more even toned. There. And let's get the stem on that. The same thing I did last time, starting kind of in the middle-ish. And this time I'm going behind another thing, so we'll see how that goes. A little up there, and that's going to feather a bit, but since this is just meeting the bottom of the leaf anyway, I'm not too worried about it feathering. So let's get the green, and got too much green that's a little off to the side. Let's see if I can lift a little of that. There we go. And start pulling that down. Because we're going to pull it down until we run out, and then we're going to go back up and get that deep red color from the Arteza set again. Start it off at the bottom and bring it up towards the top to get this ombre effect of having that red in here. And then we can do the grass. Didn't spray that one, but the Artezas reactivate pretty easy, so that shouldn't be a problem. Oh yeah, not a problem at all. Because we don't want it to be overwhelmingly red, we just need that little touch. That little touch. And dab it in there a little ways up, and I think that will do. And hopefully, yeah, it's pretty warm back here. It's not terribly uncomfortable, but it is warm enough that the paint is drying nicely. Now for those hibiscus, I'm going to pull my egg plate over here just to show you what I'm going to do, because I'm trying to use these up. These are from some older sets. Some of it was the very first set I got when I decided to get back into watercolor again, and it was a cheap set. So I had to add some vegetable glycerin to help reactivate this, and some things like this cobalt have been a real pill. I'll be glad when it's gone. This is, I think of this as my dump pan. Leftover watercolor pencil that was too short for me to use normally. I just peeled off the wood and just dumped it on the side. This is a red from the other set, sort of a more red-orange, maybe closer to vermilion. This is yellow cerulean, and I don't really like colors that change quickly over time when you put them on the page, and this, over a very short period of time, it's not exactly that it's a light problem, but it's an age problem. Over time, it darkens and becomes more brown than yellow. There are much more predictable yellows out there. So basically, I dumped it out of my pan so I could put something else in it. Simple as that. And I'll use it for bookmarks and things I don't care about. No big deal. And unfortunately, I don't remember the names of these tubes because I literally peeled everything out of the tubes and tossed the tubes. So your guess is as good as mine on what these colors really are. So let's start in a back one. We've got back ones here. Because we were going to... Because even though they are all the same color, I don't usually just paint them all in one glob and go back. I do these petal by petal. That way I can adjust shades and shapes individually. A bit of fixing here. We get some green where we don't want it. And since this is going to be in and our light is coming kind of from the top-ish, we're going to want darker on the bottom, and we're going to want a little bit darker on the inner part. And I'll go back and adjust that once it's dried a bit more. Let's see. Look at that petal. This petal isn't touching. And this is one of the fold over petals. So I will do this petal all in one go. And then I'll just hit the underside of it to darken it up and create that illusion of the folded over petal. So that'll be a go back. Got some back there. Looks like I enlarged those because I know I don't have these overlapping like that. Yeah, this is one petal, that is one petal. Okay, let's hit that top petal first. This one that comes back in here. Got just a little bit of another petal showing. So, like so. And see, those red lines I put down there to do the other part of the petal just disappear when they get wet. Love water-soluble pencils, otherwise known as watercolor pencils. Although you could technically call ink tints watercolor, not watercolor, but water-soluble pencils, but they're not actually watercolor. They are actually water-soluble ink. And as such, they behave a little differently. For instance, if I were to take these watercolor pencils that I've been using to draw with and say do a full picture on a shirt and then go wash the shirt, most of that would just disappear. Wash right out. But ink tints, I've been told you can actually use ink tints pencils on that shirt and it's staying. Once it's done, it's done. It's staying forever, which I think is really cool. I haven't tried it. I don't even have any ink tints pencils, although they are kind of on my wish list. I'd like to play with them. But I've seen some absolutely beautiful art made with them because they're pencils that don't look like much when you first put them on a page. But then when you go back and activate them with your water, oh boy. Just, oh wow. It goes from to, woo, look at that. Yeah, I want to play with them sometime. Maybe in the future I'll get my hands on a set and maybe do some stuff here for people to see. Where do I want to start? Let's start with this very back petal here, because it's going to end up with the most shade when I'm all done with this. Go ahead and get started on it. There we go. Alrighty. Let these dry just a little bit more, and we'll switch over to the lily pads on the end and pick a green for the back. Now I want this to be kind of a bluer green. I could use the same color I've been using here. It would help me use up my palette. Or I could go super, super green and use the sap light that I've still got over there. Or I could go and use that Aurelian and make it kind of brownish, but that would make the grass look kind of dead. Now, let's go ahead and use up that one I was using on the hibiscus, and we'll see how it does against that greener background. Because layering with watercolors, one of the nice things about it is that when you put one color on top of another, you can completely change a color. It's not exactly mixing, it is layering, but it's layering in the same way that you'd get if you had different colors of glass and you layer them on each other. You're still not going to get blue by layering yellow and green like you would with the glass, but you'll still end up with new colors that weren't quite there before. You can also do this with alcohol markers, layering watercolor marks, with layering ink, alcohol ink markers. I have a little color it yourself sticker book. I bought them for the kids initially, but I liked their little books so much I bought one just for me to play with. Because I decided that because of the way they're made, those sticker books would be perfect for those alcohol markers, which admittedly I hadn't really used much since I got them. Nothing against the markers, just hadn't really gotten the right medium for them. I made a picture when I first got them, basically to try them out, and it was gorgeous. I'll admit, it was absolutely gorgeous. The markers worked wonderfully. And I just really hadn't found another subject I felt worthy of spending that much ink on, because I did. I had one marker that I completely used up every drop of ink on one picture for that. Because I had gotten an Arteza set to start off. Yeah, I know, there's that word again. They're not even sponsoring me, but I use a lot of their stuff apparently, because they're economical and not terribly cheaply made, if that makes a lot of sense. I mean, they are not expensive, but they're not like buying, say, Rose Art. They're not just, you know, the absolute cheapest thing on the market as far as quality goes. There's what I'm trying to say. The quality isn't cheap quality. It's not on the same level as, say, the Copics. I do have two, because some of the colors that I wanted that didn't come in my initial set, that seemed to have been the only way I was going to get them. And my other problem with Arteza's alcohol markers was that, at least at the time, maybe they've got them now, but at the time you could only buy them as sets. No individual marker buying on those, which was a problem when I ran out of just one marker and I didn't need a whole new set. So I had to go looking. I went off to Michael's, and Michael's probably had the color I wanted, but they were down to their last marker of that color. And when I opened it to check it, somebody else had already ruined the nib. I wasn't buying that. So then I had to turn to the most expensive thing I could find, Copic. And I don't like testing stuff like that. It just uses up their stuff, and then people like me come by and buy their stuff, sometimes without checking, and we end up with garbage when we get home that we either have to go all the way back to the store to replace one pen, or we give up and say, well, I just lost anywhere from $1.50 to $7 and just throw it away. And I really don't like throwing away $7. Of course, if it was a Copic, I probably would go through the effort to get it exchanged. You see, I'm going to put that darkness there, and voila, suddenly we have the shade for that petal. I want to shade this one a little bit more here. And I am also kind of feathering it a bit so I can get some lines. And there's going to be more shade down there because just down there, naturally, it's going to have less light to work with. So a little bit more darkness down here. There we go. Okay. And next petal on the next flower. I think I'm going to do the same thing, but I've got the stamen coming up here, so I'll be able to move into that next petal if I want. Too much. Wash that off. Oops. Almost got my clean one. And a little more water on here, and you might notice this is a cheaper one, and you'll notice that even on this cotton paper, it is not flowing quite as well as my Daniel Smith or my Winsor & Newton. The pigments are just a little bit heavier, and they just kind of sit there. I can still make them work, obviously, but you can see this compared to, say, one of these others, like, well, let's see, that's the Arteza, which is actually better than whatever this is, or the colored pencils here, or even compared to these, and you can see these really, really nicely. They just kind of flow and do their thing, and this, I don't know, it just seems like it's kind of heavy. It just sits there. it's a lot more work to push it around and get it to where I want it. Let's see, our deeper area is going to be under here. Get that out there. Excuse me. Gotta love this state. If it's not allergies and dust, then it's dust and whatever else is going on. And always humidity. This one's going to be naturally darker, so I'm just going to go ahead and cover it. And then I'm going to paint the one next to it. Which is kind of folding under. But just like doing the layers next to those lily pads on the next one, you can see that going over it just makes it darker. Doesn't really affect the colors a whole lot, it just makes it darker. I feel like I just need more darkness to even start this one. So let's see if I can just get some on here. I do like this color. I hope I can eventually figure out what it is so that I can get it in a better brand so that it'll work a little smoother. Let's go ahead and get that one behind the stamen. Right up in there. Still digging that synth wave? I am. This one's going on for a little bit longer than some because it's a 2 hour, so I've basically just paused it and I'm using it for today too. Never realize how good some stuff is until nobody uses it anymore. I guess they say that every generation though, don't they? Because the music from the 1940s is nothing like what you had in the 50s. Certainly nothing like what they do today. And now here we are lamenting the 80s. Oh, don't we all miss the 80s with giant with giant shoulder pads and crazy wild hair. Although I've noticed that some of the coloring from the punk era of the 80s seems to have become quite popular again. Strangely colored hair and all that. And yeah, back in that time it wasn't considered respectable. It was the rebellion. It was the rebellious teenage thing to go wear crazy colored clothes and wildly colored hair and all this stuff. Ridiculously overpowering makeup so that nobody could see what your face actually looked like. In wild neon colors. I think the wildest things I had were my clothes. I was a little bit young for that at the time. So I didn't really do that. I've never really been particularly rebellious. Rebellion wasn't met with some of the laughter and, oh, isn't that cute that we see so much now. Now it's just the norm. Yeah, we're all going to look like that because wasn't that cool back in the 80s? People forget that that was rebellion. That was rebel against the authorities, against these stuck-up adults or whatever they were rebelling against. In the 60s, it was against the wars. So I don't really know what they were protesting in the 80s. Maybe the Cold War? I don't know. I want to darken these up some. I'm going to put a little bit more on some of these and bring them out a little bit more. Not all of them, just some of them. Kind of a difference in here. I think there was one here that got kind of washed out, so I'm going to go ahead and put it back. because it looks like there was one that curved back through here. Oops, and I'm going to have that one bulge out a little bit apparently. See if I can fix that shape. And let it curve back around again, because this is the curly, swirly grass at the bottom of the pond, doing its own version of rebellion, I suppose. Rebelling against the dark, reaching for the light, looking for the light out of that murk at the bottom of the pond. Yeah, that looks disjointed. It's a little better. It'll do. It's just a bookmark. Just a bookmark. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's a nice thing about playing with bookmarks. Don't have to be perfect. I'm not going to try to sell it to anybody. It's just a bookmark. Just a bookmark. Let's see. That one on the back, I just feel like it probably should be a little darker. Get a little more paint on it. Maybe not as much as I think I just picked up. Yep. Other thing about the cheaper paints is sometimes you get a lot, sometimes you get a lot of nothing. They're harder to reactivate, and when they do, they behave in not always predictable ways. There we go. Let's see. Maybe one more that needs a little bit more. Maybe I could just add a little bit more to all of them. I think I might. Just make a little bit more on all of them. Not a terrible lot, but I don't want them to just disappear. I had someone tell me once, wow, I've never seen watercolors like those. Are you sure they're watercolors? They're so bright. Yep, it's definitely watercolor. How do you get them so bright? Layers. I guess they're used to maybe some of the more muted colors you'll see in watercolors for, I don't know, bedtime stories? Or, I don't know, what do you think about when you think of watercolors? Do you think of watery, barely there colors on a page? Seems to be what this person was thinking of, and the idea that my bright and colorful paintings were watercolored seemed to kind of shock them. Not in a bad way, just, you know, surprising, like, oh wow, I didn't know they could do that. Kind of sad, really. I mean, that would be like insisting that oil colors all have to be dark and broody. Anybody who thinks that has never seen Vincent van Gogh or some of the other more colorfully inclined painters. Of course, I'm sure that there were people that think that all classical paintings are Monet. Calm, reflective garden work. Yeah, not always. Sometimes you can go back to places that are really ancient. Some of the Greek and Romans and Phoenicians and some of those. Yeah, porn's not a new idea. They had a pretty good grip on it back then. In fact, porn is a modification and moderation? A modern rendition of the ancient word pornea. That's where it started, pornea. And they would have this pornea religiously, no pun intended, on walls and in frescoes. So here you've got, in public, people having sex on the wall in graphic detail. Wish I was joking. Not. They thought that was the norm shortly before the volcano exploded. That makes you wonder. We look around and the phrase sex sells, they use it for everything. Maybe they're not literally having sex on the screens yet, at least not without a warning, or on posters. I don't know, some of them might be. There's some places I wonder about what their advertising really is doing. But it's open to the public and people can see it. Anybody who wants to see it just has to click the right website. And this is all just the norm. This is the way people are now. Let's see what they're like in another century. If they keep going, we're going to probably not bother with clothing anymore. I mean, what's the point? Let's all just start a nude colony because they're mostly nude walking around anyway. It's like, oh yeah. 300 years ago, we decided that clothing was just a waste of natural resources, so we did a movement to do away with clothing. And now we're all happy and free. Wonder what excuse they'll use for some of the sexual crimes that go on then, because now they're like, oh well, she was showing off too much. She was asking for it. Nobody's wearing any clothing at all. Are they still asking for it? Or are they going to sit there and go, oh, how dare you? I'm offended. I'm offended because you thought that I wanted sex just because I wasn't wearing any clothes in public. Aren't people silly? They do things and they think that nobody else is going to do anything with it. They wear clothes and then they complain that are barely there and complain that people are staring at them. Well, what did you expect people to do? You're basically wearing nothing. Of course people are staring at you. What else are they going to do? I mean, they're probably, if they're polite, doing their level best to pretend you're wearing clothing. And then they get all offended when somebody points out, you know what, I can see this and that and the other thing of your anatomy. Are you sure you were, aren't missing a button or something? How dare you stare at me? Well, I think you're kind of asking to be stared at, aren't you? I mean, you didn't put that on this morning saying, I don't want anybody to look at me, so I'm going to wear this. And there's nothing on it that says that only certain people look at me because I'm wearing this. Because you can be sure if there's enough of you showing, somebody's going to be staring, either because they're horrified at what they're seeing, or because they want to see more. If there's any more left to see. Some things leave little to the imagination. But imagination, that's what art's really about, isn't it? I mean, there are people out there that strive to do ultra-realism, I think is what they call it. Or, yeah, ultra-realism. And their goal is to make it look hyper. That's it, hyper-realistic. As in, like, real, but, like, so totally real that you really should have just taken a photograph. The result's going to be about the same. But if you look at some of those older works, even the ones where they were doing portraits, where they're supposed to be relatively accurate, I say that because while they were supposed to be relatively accurate and you could tell who it was, they were also supposed to sort of Photoshop a little bit. Obviously in the 1400s they didn't have Photoshop, but the equivalent was that the artist was supposed to render them in a flattering light. What did that mean? Well, if their nose was a little bit big, maybe we could maybe just do that nose just a little bit smaller. Maybe they had a few pimples that we're simply not going to paint in. Maybe they're not really as pretty as they think they are, but they want to look that pretty on paper for the future, so we'll change the contour of their face here, even up their eyes there, maybe make their chin a little smaller. And some of the ones that were really ugly, and you look at their portraits and you think, oh my gosh, that guy was so ugly. Talk about inbreeding there. And that was nothing compared to real life. Real life was even worse. Inbreeding. Check your backgrounds. Of course, that's all royalty ever did, was check their backgrounds and make sure it was another cousin. Resulting in giant chins, huge sloping foreheads, bone diseases. Oh yeah, isn't genetics fun? Especially when it starts going wrong. And they would insist that these people get married because the line must go on. The royal lineage must continue. That's not quite dark enough. Let's add a little bit more. Personally, I'm glad I'm not royalty, and the only lineages I have to worry about are lineages of my farm animals and making sure that they don't become grandfathers to their first cousins. Because even among animals, maybe it's not quite as big a deal in most cases as humans. But even animals, if you inbreed them too much, you get crazy things. I mean, look at the pug. They have officially decided that pug is no longer a normal dog breed because the breed itself is so inbred at this point and has so many medical problems associated because of this that they're just not referring to it as a normal breed anymore. It's a specialty breed, I guess. They said they changed it, but I don't remember seeing what they changed it to. But apparently they've decided it is no longer a normal breed. Wow. Okay. This is the result of several centuries of inbreeding a specific group of traits to produce a specific shape of dog. Offhand, I can't remember what pugs were bred to do. If anybody does know, I'm obviously interested in knowing what the original purpose of the pug was. So you can drop that in the comments so I can be amused by it later. And it's shaping up nicely. Still got to do the fold over bit right here, and it needs to dry a little bit. I guess I'll work on the stamens just a tad, because I kind of need that to dry a little bit more before I add that last piece on. So let's switch to the smaller brush. Whoops, almost forgot to shape that. There we go. Now let's see. For that, I'm going to get the really tiny one. This is a 10/0. Not exactly sure what that means, but basically it means it's really small and really thin, and I can get really tiny lines and little tiny dots with it. And I'm going to go ahead and use that Arulian, which I can't get enough water off this little tiny brush to activate. There we go. Spray bottle to the rescue. There we go. And it'll darken over time, but in this case, I don't mind. I just removed it from my palette because I had another yellow that I wanted more. So, we're going to have some shading underneath here. Just a little light shading. And there's a little bit of texture because that's usually kind of a bumpy, fluffy spot. So let's work that in just a tad. Even that out a little bit. There we go. Now just get some dots of that color. And just kind of dot them around and give it some texture. There we go. And the next one. Same thing there. Looks like I had the little puff at the end coming out there, so I'll get that there. Drag that down. Get us a few dots. And give it some texture. Texture, texture, texture. A lot of what we see is texture. Could you imagine walking around and everything being just a general shape with no texture? I mean, if you wear glasses, you can just take your glasses off and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you don't, borrow somebody who's glasses who does use glasses. Because I have noted that glasses that are not your prescription tend to show you the world of the person who normally would wear them. And then you can look around and you can see trees as giant green blobs and brown sticks. All the texture just disappears. You'll see a colored movement and say, oh, is that a bird over there? Mostly because of the way it's moving, not because you know what it looks like. All right, last petal, last shade on the last petal. Let's get that paint. And now I'm curious. How long have we been going? Have we got our hour? Ooh, perfect. Just a few minutes shy of it. So let's get that under petal so that we can have that fold over while I choke on a little bit of pollen. And shade this up just a little bit. There. And ta-da! What do you think, guys? Do you like these? I've got enough time. Let me finger shape my brush real quick. That up. And as a lot of artists like to call this, the reveal. As we peel off that tape. Boop. Off to the trash, you horrible, useless stuff. As you can see, there it was again, where it's not really down. We've got spots where it shows. But there we go. We have pond grass. Oh no, we've got a duckweed, I guess, with little tadpoles. We've got some really cool mushrooms that I saw in a picture someplace. We've got some hibiscus out of my brain with some of that negative painting behind it. Which technically that's what this background would have been too, since I painted this after the mushrooms. And here we have some overlapping pond lilies underneath the water. So, if you've enjoyed this, we will continue in another time. Oh, and I promised to tell you what I was going to do next. Next, I have this, if I've got this on here right, oops, wrong direction, there we go. I have this cute little coconut octopus. Yeah, that's what he's called, because I saw bunches and bunches and bunches of pictures of these little guys, and we'll talk about octopi, seashells, the ocean, and shy little octopi on our next video. Until then, this has been Sharon Alexander of Alexander Arts. If you want to see that octopus, don't forget to subscribe so that you'll get that notification. Bye!